The dust cloud rising from the valley told Harper Preston everything she needed to know before she even reached the ridge overlooking her father's ranch. Strangers had moved onto the land while she had been away burying him in town, and from the looks of the campfires dotting the property, they had no intention of leaving. Harper pulled her mare to a stop and stared down at what had been her home for all 22 years of her life. The ranch house her grandfather had built in 1862 still stood, smoke curling from its chimney as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Her father was gone, dead from a sudden fever that had taken him in less than a week, and now these vultures had descended on the land he had worked so hard to keep. She counted at least 8 men moving around the property, leading horses to the barn, hauling water from the well that her father had dug with his own hands. One of them had even hung laundry on the line her mother had strung up before consumption had claimed her 10 years ago. The sight made Harper's jaw clench so hard her teeth ached. It was late September of 1879, and the Colorado mountains were already showing their autumn colors. Salida sat in a valley where the Arkansas River ran cold and fast, surrounded by peaks that would soon be white with snow. Her father had chosen this land because of the water and the natural protection the mountains offered. He had built something real here, something that mattered. And now these squatters thought they could just take it. Harper turned her horse back toward town, her mind racing through her options. She had no brothers, no husband, no male relatives to stand up for her claim. The deed to the property was in her saddlebag, freshly stamped with her name after the probate had gone through that very morning. But a piece of paper would not make 8 armed men leave her land. The sheriff had been sympathetic but clear when she had asked for help. He had 2 deputies and a town to protect. Unless the squatters committed a crime in Salida itself, he could not spare the men to ride out to her ranch and evict them. He had suggested she sell the land and move somewhere safer for a woman alone. Harper had walked out of his office without another word. The sun was setting by the time she reached the small boarding house where she had been staying since her father's death. She stabbed her horse in the livery next door and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, her body aching with exhaustion and grief. She had not slept more than a few hours at a time in over a week, and the weight of everything threatened to crush her. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Then she washed her face in the basin, changed into a clean dress, and went downstairs to the dining room where the other boarders gathered for supper. The food tasted like sawdust in her mouth, but she forced herself to eat. She needed her strength. Whatever she decided to do, she would need every ounce of energy she could muster. "You look troubled, Miss Preston." Harper glanced up to find Mrs. Chen, the boarding house owner, standing beside her table. The older woman had been kind to her since she had arrived, never prying but always offering quiet support. "I have a problem with my father's ranch," Harper admitted. "Squatters moved in while I was in town settling the estate. The sheriff says he cannot help." Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. "How many?" 8 that I counted. That is too many for a woman alone." Mrs. Chen poured Harper more coffee without asking. "You need help." "I have no money to hire men," Harper said quietly. "Everything my father had went into the land. I have maybe $50 to my name until I can sell cattle, and I cannot sell cattle I cannot get to." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, then she pulled out the chair across from Harper and sat down. This was unusual enough that Harper paid attention. "There is a man," Mrs. Chen said carefully. "He comes to town maybe once a month for supplies. Lives up in the mountains, traps and hunts. People say he is dangerous, but I think he is just a man who wants to be left alone. Why would he help me? I do not know that he would. But if anyone could make 8 men leave your land, it would be him." Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "His name is Rutger Greyson. He will probably be in town tomorrow or the next day. He always comes when the moon is waning, sells his furs to the trading post." Harper considered this. A mountain man would be as much a stranger to her as the squatters on her land. But at least this stranger came recommended by someone she trusted. "What would I offer him in payment?" Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "That would be between you and Mr. Greyson. But I think you should talk to him before you give up on your father's land." That night, Harper lay awake listening to the sounds of the town settling in for sleep. Dogs barked in the distance. A drunk sang off-key as he stumbled past. Somewhere a baby cried. Normal sounds of normal life, and yet her own life felt anything but normal. She thought about her father, about the stories he had told her of coming west after the war. He had been a Union soldier who had seen too much death, and he had wanted land where he could build something instead of destroying it. He had met her mother in Kansas, married her within a month, and brought her to Colorado to start fresh. They had struggled those first years. Winters that nearly killed them. Drought that tested their faith. Indians who were rightfully angry about white settlers on their hunting grounds, though her father had always tried to deal fairly with them. Slowly, carefully, they had built something worth having. Harper would not let it go without a fight. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Harper walked to the trading post 3 times, always asking the same question. The owner, a grizzled man named Pete, who had lost his left arm in a mining accident, shook his head each time. "Have not seen Rutger in about 3 weeks, Pete said on her 3rd visit. "He is due any time now, but that man keeps his own schedule. Could be today, could be next week when he comes. Could you send word to Mrs. Chen's boarding house?" Pete studied her with his one good eye. "You in some kind of trouble, Miss Preston?" "Nothing I cannot handle," Harper said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Rutger is not the kind of man you want to owe a favor to," Pete warned. "Right now, he is exactly the kind of man I need." She was walking back to the boarding house when she saw him. Even in a town used to rough men, he stood out. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin clothing and heavy boots, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his ability to handle whatever came his way. 2 pack mules followed him, loaded down with furs. Harper stopped walking and stared. She had seen mountain men before, but never one who looked quite like this. There was something almost elemental about him, as if he were carved from the same stone as the peaks he called home. He tied the mules outside the trading post and went inside without glancing in her direction. Harper made herself wait. She walked back to the boarding house, checked her appearance in the small mirror in her room, and tried to calm her racing heart. This was just a business proposition. She would offer him whatever she could afford, explain the situation, and hope he agreed to help. She gave him 30 minutes to conclude his business with Pete, then walked back to the trading post. The mules were still outside, but they had been unloaded. Through the window she could see the mountain man examining a new rifle while Pete looked on. The 2 men seemed to be in deep discussion about its merits. Harper waited until they finished their conversation, then pushed open the door. The bell above it jangled, and both men looked her way. Up close, the mountain man was even more impressive. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. His face was deeply tanned, with lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted into the sun often. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "Miss Preston," Pete said, sounding surprised. "What brings you back?" "I need to speak with Mr. Greyson," Harper said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "If he has a moment." The mountain man's gaze moved over her slowly, assessing. She lifted her chin and met his eyes directly. She might be asking for help, but she would not grovel. "What about?" His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often. "A business matter, privately if possible." Pete cleared his throat. "You can use the back room. I will watch the shop." Rutger Greyson did not move for a long moment. Then he nodded once and gestured for Harper to lead the way. The back room was small and cramped, filled with crates and supplies. It smelled of leather and tobacco. Harper turned to face the mountain man, very aware of how large he was in the confined space. "My name is Harper Preston," she began. "My father owned a ranch about 10 miles south of here, down in the valley by the river. He died 2 weeks ago, and the land passed to me. While I was in town settling his affairs, squatters moved onto the property. 8 men, all armed. The sheriff says he cannot help me evict them, so you want me to do it." It was not a question. "Yes, why would I?" "Because I will pay you." His expression did not change. "How much?" This was the hard part. Harper took a breath. "I have $50 in cash. I also have cattle on that land, about 200 head. Once I can access them, I can sell enough to pay you more. Or I could pay you in cattle directly if you prefer. $50 and a promise of cattle I cannot verify exist." He shook his head. "Not interested." Panic fluttered in Harper's chest, but she pushed it down. "What would interest you?" He was quiet for a long moment, his strange eyes studying her face. "Why not just sell the land and move on? A ranch is no place for a woman alone." "That land is my home," Harper said fiercely. "My father built it from nothing. My mother is buried there. I am not giving it up because some cowards waited until the owner died to steal it." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or just curiosity. 8 men, he said. You are certain? I counted 8. There could be more I did not see. And you want them gone without bloodshed, I am guessing. I want them gone, Harper said flatly. How that happens is up to them. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. You have steel in you. I will give you that. Will you help me or not? He was quiet again, thinking. Harper waited, her fingernails digging into her palms. I will go look at the situation, he finally said. If I think I can handle it, we will talk price. No promises until I see what I am dealing with. It was not a yes, but it was not a no either. Harper nodded. When? Now, I need to resupply first. Meet me at the livery in an hour. He brushed past her and went back into the main shop, leaving Harper standing in the back room with her heart pounding. She had taken the first step. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. She spent the hour checking on her horse and gathering her own supplies. If they were riding out to the ranch, she wanted to be prepared for anything. She changed back into her riding clothes, sturdy pants and a wool shirt, and braided her long dark hair to keep it out of her way. When she reached the livery, Rutger Greyson was already there, loading supplies onto a large bay horse that looked like it could carry him and his gear through anything. He glanced at her outfit but did not comment. They rode out of Salida in silence, heading south along the well-worn trail that led to her family's land. The September afternoon was warm, but with an undercurrent of chill that promised winter was not far off. Golden aspens covered the hillsides, brilliant against the dark green of the pine forests. Harper had ridden this trail countless times, but having the mountain man beside her made it feel different. He rode easily, his body moving with the horse as if they were one creature. His eyes constantly scanned the landscape, taking in every detail. This was a man who missed nothing. How long have you lived in the mountains? Harper asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. 10 years, give or take. Where were you before? East. He did not elaborate. Harper tried again. Do you ever get lonely up there by yourself? No. She gave up on conversation and focused on riding. If he wanted to be taciturn, fine. As long as he helped her reclaim her land, he could be as quiet as he wanted. They reached the ridge overlooking the ranch as the sun was starting to sink toward the western peaks. Rutger pulled his horse to a stop and studied the valley below. Harper watched his face, trying to read his reaction. The squatters had been busy. More structures had been added since yesterday, crude lean-tos and a large campfire pit. She could see men moving around, tending horses and hauling supplies. They had settled in like they planned to stay. How much land? Rutger asked. 320 acres. We have water rights to the river and the northern boundary runs along that ridgeline, she pointed. Cattle? Should be grazing in the high pasture, about 2 miles east. My father always moved them up there for the summer. Rutger was quiet, his eyes moving over the terrain with professional assessment. Harper waited, barely breathing. There are 9 men down there, he finally said. You miscounted. Harper looked again and realized he was right. A 9th man had emerged from the barn. Can you do it? She asked. Probably. He glanced at her. But not for $50 and a maybe. Then name your price. He turned his horse and started riding along the ridge away from the overlook. Harper followed, confused. They rode for about 10 minutes before he stopped in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. We will camp here tonight, he said, dismounting. I will scout the ranch after dark, get a better sense of what we are dealing with. Tomorrow we will talk price. Harper slid off her mare, her legs stiff from the ride. I thought you wanted to know your price before you committed. I want to know if it is even possible before we discuss payment. He started unpacking his horse with efficient movements. 9 armed men is different than 8. Details matter. She could not argue with that logic. Harper began setting up her own camp, laying out her bedroll and gathering wood for a fire. The temperature was already dropping as the sun sank lower. Rutger worked in silence, moving with the easy competence of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He hobbled the horses in a small patch of grass, arranged his gear with military precision, and built a fire that caught on the first strike of his flint. You should eat, he said, pulling out some dried meat and hard biscuits from his pack, and then sleep. I will wake you before I leave. I am coming with you. He looked at her like she had lost her mind. No, it is my land. I have a right to see what is happening on it. You will make noise, slow me down, and possibly get us both caught. Stay here. Harper crossed her arms. I have been moving through these mountains since I was a child. I know how to be quiet. The answer is no. You cannot stop me from following you. They stared at each other across the fire. In the gathering darkness, his eyes seemed to glow with reflected firelight. Harper refused to look away. Finally, he sighed, a sound of deep frustration. If you make a single sound, if you give away our position, I will tie you to a tree and leave you there until morning. Understood? Understood. They ate in silence, the tension between them thick as smoke. Harper was not sure why she had pushed so hard. Maybe because she needed to see for herself what they were up against. Maybe because she was tired of being told what she could and could not do. Maybe because something about this man made her want to prove herself. When full darkness fell, Rutger stood and started changing his gear. He removed anything that might rattle or reflect light, checking every pocket and strap. He unrolled a dark cloth and used it to cover his rifle. Then he looked at Harper. Same for you. Anything that makes noise stays here. Anything that shines stays here. Harper removed her belt buckle, her small knife in its metal sheath, even the pins from her braid. When Rutger nodded approval, she felt an absurd sense of pride. They left the horses hobbled in the clearing and moved into the darkness on foot. Rutger led the way, his movements so quiet Harper could barely hear him, even though he was only a few feet ahead. She focused on placing her feet carefully, avoiding dry branches and loose stones. It took them almost an hour to work their way down the ridge to a position overlooking the ranch. Rutger found a spot behind a fallen log where they could observe without being seen. He settled in to watch, and Harper lay beside him, her body pressed close to his in the confined space. She was acutely aware of his warmth, his size, the controlled power in his stillness. He smelled like pine smoke and leather and something wild she could not name. When his arm brushed against hers, she felt heat flash through her body that had nothing to do with the temperature focus. She told herself sternly, "This is business, not pleasure." Below them, the squatters had gathered around their fire. Harper could hear the murmur of their voices but could not make out words. 9 men, just as Rutger had said. They looked rough and hard, the kind of men who would take what they wanted and shoot anyone who got in their way. Rutger watched them for a long time, his breathing slow and even. Harper tried to be as still as he was, but her body wanted to fidget, to shift position, to do something other than lie in the dark next to a stranger who made her heart race. After what felt like hours, Rutger touched her arm and gestured that they should retreat. They worked their way back up the ridge as carefully as they had descended. When they reached their camp, Harper was surprised to see the moon had only moved a short distance across the sky. It had felt like they had been gone all night, but it had probably been less than 3 hours. Rutger added wood to the fire and sat down, his expression thoughtful. Harper waited for him to speak. 7 of them sleep in the house, he finally said. 2 are keeping watch, rotating every few hours. They have good discipline, which means they are not just opportunistic drifters. Someone organized them. Can you still make them leave? He looked at her across the fire. Yes. But it will be risky, and there is a good chance someone will get hurt. Maybe killed. Harper's stomach tightened. She did not want blood on her hands, but she also would not let fear make her decisions. What do you need from me? I need to know you can handle a gun. I can shoot. Hitting a target is different than shooting at a man who is shooting back. I understand that. He studied her for a long moment. Tomorrow, I will test you. If you can handle yourself, we move forward. If not, we find another way. What other way? I have not figured that out yet. He rolled out his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. Harper lay down on her own bedroll, but sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with everything she had seen, everything that could go wrong. 9 armed men against 1 mountain man and 1 woman. The odds were not good, but what choice did she have? She must have eventually dozed off, because she woke to find the sun already up and Rutger cooking something over the fire. The smell made her stomach growl. Coffee is ready, he said without looking at her. And I caught a rabbit last night. Harper sat up, running her hands through her loose hair. She must look like a mess, but vanity seemed pointless in the wilderness. She accepted the coffee gratefully and sipped the strong, bitter brew. The rabbit was tough but filling. They ate quickly, and then Rutger stood and gestured for her to follow him. He led her to a small clearing about 50 yards from camp. He had already set up targets, bits of wood propped against trees at varying distances. Show me what you can do, he said, handing her his rifle. Harper checked the weapon, familiarizing herself with its weight and balance. It was a Henry repeater. Much nicer than the old Spencer her father had taught her to shoot with. She loaded it, raised it to her shoulder, and fired. The first shot went wide, but the second and third hit their targets. She worked through the magazine, her confidence growing with each shot. When she finished, Rutger retrieved the targets and examined them. His expression gave nothing away. "You can shoot," he acknowledged, "but that was stationary targets with no pressure. Real combat is different, I know that." He looked at her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "All right, here is the plan. We need to split their forces and make them think they are facing more people than they actually are. Fear and confusion will be our best weapons." Over the next hour, he explained his strategy. It was risky and depended on split-second timing, but Harper could see the logic in it. If it worked, they could drive the squatters off without bloodshed. If it failed, they would both probably die. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Rutger asked when he finished explaining. "Once we start, there is no going back." Harper met his eyes. "I am sure. Then we move tonight." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Rutger showed Harper how to move silently through the woods, how to use cover effectively, how to steady her breathing before taking a shot. He was a good teacher, patient but demanding. When she made mistakes, he corrected her without judgment. As the day wore on, Harper found herself watching him when she should have been focusing on training. The way his muscles moved under his shirt when he demonstrated a technique. The concentration in his eyes when he explained a concept. The rare smile that appeared when she did something right. She was attracted to him, she realized. Strongly attracted. This was not the time or place for such feelings, but her body did not seem to care about logic. That evening, as they prepared for what was to come, Harper felt compelled to break the silence. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You still have not told me what you want in payment." Rutger looked up from checking his weapons. "I have not decided yet. That is not an answer." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father fought for something he believed in and built something worth having. Men like that deserve to have their legacy protected. If his daughter has the courage to stand up for what is hers, I can help her do it." It was the longest speech she had heard from him, and it made her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you." He nodded once, then went back to his preparations. As darkness fell, they moved into position. Phase 1 of the plan required Harper to create a distraction on the eastern edge of the property while Rutger approached from the west. She had lanterns, gunpowder, and a healthy dose of terror keeping her company. She waited in the darkness, counting down the minutes until it was time to move. Her hands shook as she prepared the first charge, but she forced them steady. Rutger was counting on her. Her father's memory was counting on her. When the time came, she lit the fuse and ran. The explosion lit up the night sky, much louder than she had expected. Harper heard shouts from the ranch, saw men scrambling. She lit the second charge and ran again, creating the impression of multiple attackers coming from the east. On the western side, Rutger was doing the same thing, his explosions even larger than hers. The squatters were panicking now, firing wildly into the darkness at enemies they could not see. Harper moved to her next position, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She could hear the squatters shouting to each other, trying to organize a defense. But they did not know how many attackers there were or where the next explosion would come from. This was the critical moment. Either they would hold their ground and force a real fight, or they would break and run. For a terrifying minute, it seemed like they would stand. Then one of the horses broke loose and stampeded through the camp, adding to the chaos. More horses followed, and suddenly the squatters were scrambling to avoid being trampled. Rutger chose that moment to fire into the air and shout in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You have got 30 seconds to get on your horses and ride out, or we start shooting to kill. This land belongs to the Preston family, and we are taking it back." Harper added her own voice to his, making herself sound as fierce as possible. 30 seconds. Starting now. The squatters broke. Within seconds, they were throwing themselves onto whatever horses they could catch and racing into the darkness. Harper heard the thunder of hooves fading into the distance and could hardly believe it had worked. She stayed in position for another 10 minutes, making sure it was not a feint. When Rutger finally appeared beside her, moving so quietly she did not hear him until he spoke, she nearly screamed. "They are gone," he said. "At least for now. We should check the house and make sure they did not leave anyone behind." They approached the ranch house carefully, weapons ready. But Rutger had been right. The building was empty, the squatters having fled so quickly they had left most of their supplies behind. Harper stepped into the home where she had grown up, and emotion hit her like a physical blow. Everything was different. The squatters had rearranged furniture, left their filth everywhere, treated her family's home like it was nothing. "Hey," Rutger's voice was surprisingly gentle. You all right? They ruined it, Harper whispered. Everything my parents built, they just ruined it. No. He moved to stand beside her. They left a mess, but they did not ruin anything. A mess can be cleaned. Your land is still here. Your home is still standing. That is what matters. Harper wiped her eyes, angry at herself for crying. I know. I am just tired. Then rest. I will keep watch in case they decide to come back. You need rest too. I will sleep when I am certain it is safe. Harper wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted. She found her old bedroom relatively untouched compared to the rest of the house, and collapsed onto the bed without even removing her boots. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could smell coffee brewing. For a disoriented moment, she thought her father was still alive, making breakfast like he always had. Then reality crashed back, and she remembered everything. She found Rutger in the kitchen, cooking eggs and bacon he must have found in the squatter's supplies. He had cleaned the main room while she slept, she realized. The filth was gone, furniture back in its proper place. You did not have to do that, she said. Needed something to do while I waited. He handed her a plate. Eat. We have work ahead of us today. They spent the morning making sure the squatters were really gone and assessing what damage had been done. Surprisingly little, it turned out. The men had been living on the property less than a week, not long enough to cause permanent harm. By afternoon, Harper was starting to believe she might actually reclaim her life. The cattle were still in the high pasture untouched. The barn and outbuildings were intact. She had her home back. The only question was what she owed the man who had made it possible. She found Rutger checking the well, making sure it had not been contaminated. He looked up as she approached. We need to discuss your payment, Harper said. He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. I have been thinking about that. And the squatters will not stay gone forever. They know this land is vulnerable now. They will either come back themselves or tell others about it. You need protection. Harper's stomach sank. I cannot afford to hire you to stay here. I am not asking you to hire me. He met her eyes. I am asking you to let me stay. Help you run the ranch through the winter. Make sure no one else tries what those men tried. Why would you do that? He looked away, toward the mountains that had been his home for so long. 10 years I have been up there alone. I thought that was what I wanted. But watching you fight for your land, seeing what you are willing to risk to protect it, made me remember what it was like to care about something beyond just surviving. Harper's heart was beating very fast. What are you saying? I am saying I would like to stay. Help you, see if maybe there is a life down here worth living. He looked back at her. If you will have me. 1,000 thoughts raced through Harper's mind. This man was still virtually a stranger. She knew almost nothing about his past, his life, what demons he might carry. Letting him stay could be a terrible mistake, but when she looked at him, all she saw was the man who had helped her when no one else would. The man who had risked his life for her father's legacy. The man who made her feel safer and more alive than she had ever felt before. Yes, she heard herself say. I would like that. Something in his expression softened. Good. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Rutger cleared his throat and stepped back. I should ride back to my cabin and get my things. Will you be all right here alone for a day or two? I have my rifle and I know how to use it, Harper said. I will be fine. He nodded, but she could see he did not like the idea of leaving her. Keep the doors locked. If you see anyone coming, get to a defensive position before they get close. I will. He gathered his gear quickly, preparing to ride out before the day got much later. Harper walked him to his horse, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Rutger, she said as he mounted. Thank you for everything. He looked down at her, his strange blue-gray eyes intense. I will be back as soon as I can. Stay safe, Harper. Then he was riding away, disappearing into the trees as silently as he had appeared. Harper stood in the yard of her father's ranch, watching until he was completely out of sight. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the full truth of what she was feeling. She was falling for him. The mountain man who had walked into her life just 2 days ago. It was absurd, impossible, completely illogical, and absolutely, undeniably real. The next 2 days were some of the longest of Harper's life. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away every trace of the squatters. She inventoried supplies and made lists of what would need to be purchased before winter. She rode out to check on the cattle and was relieved to find them healthy and safe. But through it all, part of her mind was always on Rutger. Wondering if he would actually come back. Wondering what it would mean if he did. On the afternoon of the second day, She heard horses approaching and her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed her rifle and moved to a window, ready to defend herself. But it was Rutger, leading 3 pack horses loaded with supplies. Behind him rode 2 other men. Harper's brief flash of joy turned to confusion and then alarm. Who were these men? Had Rutger betrayed her? She met them in the yard, rifle at the ready. Rutger saw the weapon and held up one hand in a calming gesture. "It is all right," he said. "These are friends. Rory Gallagher and his brother Sam. They have a ranch about 20 miles north of here. I asked them to help with some repairs before winter sets in." The 2 men dismounted, both tipping their hats to Harper. They looked like honest ranchers, weathered and work-worn. "Madam," the older one, Rory said, "Rutger told us about your trouble with squatters. We have had similar problems ourselves. Figured we would come help shore up your defenses, neighborly-like." Harper lowered her rifle, feeling foolish. "That is very kind of you. I apologize for the greeting." "No apology needed," Sam said with a friendly smile. "Smart woman keeps her gun close in country like this." Over the next week, the 4 of them worked from dawn until dusk. Rutger and the Gallagher brothers repaired weak spots in the barn, reinforced the doors and windows of the main house, and built a proper smokehouse for preserving meat. Harper cooked for them and helped with the lighter work, grateful for the company and the progress. She also learned more about Rutger through watching him interact with the brothers. He was still quiet, but there was an easy competence to everything he did. The Gallaghers clearly respected him, often deferring to his judgment on how best to approach a task. One evening, after the Gallaghers had retired to the barn where they were sleeping, Harper and Rutger sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "You have good friends," Harper said. "I have people I trust. That is rare enough to be valuable." "How do you know them?" "Rory had trouble with claim jumpers about 5 years ago. I helped him deal with it. We have stayed in touch since." Harper was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you do? Help people with problems the law will not handle?" "Sometimes, when it seems right, and what made this seem right." He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. "You did." The air between them felt charged, electric. Harper's pulse quickened. "Rutger, She did not know how to finish that sentence. "I know." His voice was rough. "I feel it too." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers. His hand was huge and calloused and warm, and Harper felt heat spread from that point of contact through her entire body. "I should tell you about my past," Rutger said quietly, "before this goes any further." "You do not have to." "Yes, I do." He took a breath. "I was in the war, fought for the Union. Saw things, did things that still give me nightmares. When it ended, I could not go back to civilization, could not stand being around people. So I went to the mountains and told myself I was better off alone." "What changed?" "You. Meeting you made me want something more than just existing. Made me remember what it felt like to fight for something that mattered." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I am not an easy man, Harper. I have scars inside and out. I wake up sometimes thinking I am back in the war. I go days without talking because words feel impossible. You deserve to know all that before you decide if you want me to stay." Harper turned to face him fully, her hand still in his. "My mother used to say that everyone carries scars. What matters is whether we let them define us or teach us." She brought her other hand up to touch his bearded cheek. "I want you to stay, Rutger, scars and all." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, she could see raw emotion there. "I do not deserve you. Let me be the judge of that." He pulled her closer, slowly giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Harper did not pull away. She leaned into him, and when his lips met hers, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative. Then it deepened, and Harper felt herself melting into his strength. His arms came around her, holding her like she was something precious, and she had never felt safer or more desired in her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rutger rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you in Pete's trading post," he admitted. Harper laughed, the sound breathless and happy. "I have been wanting you to do that almost as long." They sat together on the porch for hours, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Harper learned that Rutger had grown up in Pennsylvania, that his family had died during the war, that he had been alone for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. She told him about her childhood on the ranch, about watching her mother slowly fade from consumption, about her father's quiet and determination. She told him about the dreams she had for the land, the legacy she wanted to build. "We could build it together," Rutger said. "If you would want that, I would want that very much." When they finally went inside, Rutger insisted on taking the spare bedroom despite Harper's unspoken invitation for something more. "We will do this right," he said firmly. "I am not going to dishonor you or your father's memory." The old-fashioned propriety made Harper smile even as her body ached for more of his touch. But he was right. They had time. The Gallagher brothers stayed another 3 days, finishing their repairs and helping bring the cattle down from the high pasture before the weather turned. On their last night, they all shared a celebratory dinner around the big table in the ranch house. "You have got a good setup here," Rory said to Harper. "With Rutger helping you, you should do well." "We are hoping to," Harper agreed. She glanced at Rutger, who sat beside her. "Though I am still learning what it takes to run a ranch this size." "Your father taught you well," Sam observed. "We saw the way you handled those cattle. You know what you are doing." "She does," Rutger said quietly. "She is stronger than she thinks she is." The pride in his voice made Harper's chest warm. After the Gallaghers left the next morning, promising to visit again come spring, Harper and Rutger were alone for the first time since he had returned from his cabin. They fell into an easy routine. Rutger handled the heavy labor, repairing equipment and maintaining the buildings. Harper managed the household and the cattle, using the knowledge her father had passed down to her. In the evenings, they cooked together, ate together, and talked about their plans for the ranch. Slowly, carefully, they were building something. The first snow came in mid-October, dusting the mountains white. Rutger had been right about needing protection. 3 times in the following weeks, strangers approached the ranch with obvious intentions to try what the squatters had tried. Each time, Rutger's presence and his reputation were enough to send them away without violence. "Word is spreading that you are here," Harper said after the 3rd incident. "People are afraid of you. Good. Fear keeps you safer than locked doors. Are you really that dangerous?" He looked at her seriously. "When I need to be." As October turned to November, the relationship between them deepened. Stolen kisses became longer, more passionate. Casual touches lingered. The tension grew until it was almost unbearable. Finally, one night in late November, Harper could not stand it any longer. She crossed the hall to Rutger's room and knocked on his door. He opened it immediately, as if he had been waiting for her. He wore only his pants, his massive chest bare. Harper's mouth went dry. "I do not want to wait anymore," she said. "I want you, Rutger. All of you." His eyes darkened. "Harper, are you sure?" "Once we cross this line, there is no going back." "I am absolutely sure." He pulled her into the room and kicked the door shut behind her. Then his mouth was on hers, demanding and passionate, and Harper gave herself over to the feeling completely. They made love slowly, Rutger being incredibly gentle despite his size and obvious desire. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, murmuring how beautiful she was, how long he had wanted this. When they finally joined, Harper felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Harper felt tears on her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Rutger asked immediately, concern in his voice. "No. God, no, I am just happy." She looked up at him. "I love you. I know it is too soon and too fast, but I do." His arms tightened around her. "It is not too soon. I love you too. Have since the moment you stood up to me in Pete's back room, all fierce determination and courage." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Harper woke in the morning to find him still holding her, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. Winter settled in hard and fast. By early December, the snow was measured in feet rather than inches, and the temperature rarely rose above freezing. But the ranch house was warm and well-stocked, and Harper had never been happier. Rutger moved his things into her room without discussion. They were together now in every way that mattered, even if they had not yet spoken vows. That changed on Christmas Eve. They were sitting by the fire, Rutger whittling a piece of wood while Harper mended shirts, when he suddenly set down his work and turned to her. "Marry me," he said. Harper looked up, startled. "What?" "Marry me. I know we have not known each other long, but I know what I want. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch into something amazing. I want to have children with you and grow old watching them grow up. Marry me, Harper." She set down her mending with shaking hands. "Yes, God, yes." He pulled her into his lap and kissed her deeply. When they broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle of cloth. Inside was a ring, silver with a small blue stone. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I kept from my old life. I want you to have it." Harper slipped it on her finger. It fit perfectly. "It is beautiful. You are beautiful, and you are about to be my wife." They were married on New Year's Day of 1880 in a small ceremony at the church in Salida. The Gallagher brothers came down to stand as witnesses, and Mrs. Chen provided a wedding feast at the boarding house. It was simple and perfect, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harper felt like her life was finally beginning. The winter months were hard but wonderful. Rutger taught Harper how to read tracks in the snow, how to hunt in winter conditions, how to survive if caught in a blizzard. She taught him how to cook more than just basic trail food, how to manage the ranch's finances, how to laugh again. They talked about the future often. Rutger wanted to expand the cattle operation. Harper wanted to start breeding horses. They debated, compromised, and planned. In February, Harper realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Rutger the news. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. Then he set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" Harper asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it. You are giving me a family, Harper. Something I never thought I would have again." Their daughter was born in October of 1880, delivered by Mrs. Chen, who came out to the ranch to help. They named her Grace, after Rutger's mother. Watching Rutger hold his tiny daughter for the first time, his huge hands cradling her with infinite gentleness, Harper fell in love with him all over again. He was going to be an amazing father. The years that followed were not always easy. They lost cattle to harsh winters and disease. They dealt with drought one summer and flooding the next. Rustlers tried twice to steal their herd, and both times Rutger dealt with them in ways that ensured they never came back. But through it all, their love only grew stronger. They had 3 more children over the next 6 years, 2 boys named Robert and Riley, and another girl they called Hope. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They expanded their land holdings, bought better breeding stock, and developed a reputation for quality cattle and horses. By 1890, the Preston Greyson Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the valley. On their 10th anniversary, Harper and Rutger rode out to the ridge where she had first shown him her father's land being occupied by squatters. It was a warm September evening, and they sat together watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Harper asked. "Leaving the mountains to help me?" Rutger pulled her close against his side. "Not for a single second. You gave me something to live for. A reason to wake up every morning. I love this land and I love our children. But mostly I love you. Everything good in my life comes from you." Harper turned in his arms to look at him. 10 years had added some gray to his hair and more lines around his eyes, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "I love you too. Thank you for walking into my life when I needed you most. Thank you for not shooting me when I tried to leave." She laughed and kissed him, and they stayed on that ridge until the stars came out, talking about the past and the future and everything in between. When they finally rode back to the ranch, they could see lights in the windows and hear their children's voices carrying on the evening air. Grace would be putting the younger ones to bed soon, being the responsible oldest child she had grown into. "We built something good here," Rutger said as they dismounted. "We did, and we are not done yet." "No," he agreed, taking her hand as they walked toward the house. "We are just getting started." Inside, Grace had indeed gotten her siblings settled. She looked up with relief when her parents came in. "I was starting to worry," she said. "It is getting dark." "We were just reminiscing," Harper said, hugging her daughter. "Thank you for watching them." "Of course." Grace kissed them both goodnight and headed to her own room. Rutger and Harper checked on the younger children, all sleeping peacefully, then retired to their own room. It had been a long day and they were both tired, but it was a good tired. The tired that came from building a life worth living. As Harper drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about how differently things could have turned out. If the squatters had never come, if Rutger had said no to helping her, if either of them had been less brave or more cautious. But fate had brought them together, and they had been smart enough to recognize something worth fighting for when they found it. The ranch would continue to grow and prosper over the coming decades. Their children would grow up strong and capable, eventually having children of their own. The Preston Greyson name would become synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Colorado. But the heart of it all would always be the love between a woman who refused to give up her father's legacy and the mountain man who walked into her life and never walked out. Years later, when they were old and gray, their grandchildren would ask them to tell the story of how they met. and Harper and Rutger would sit on the porch of the ranch house they had built together and tell the tale. They would talk about squatters and explosions, about courage and fear, about taking risks when the stakes were highest. They would talk about falling in love during a Colorado winter and building a family that would last for generations. But mostly they would talk about recognizing your person when you found them, even if the timing seemed impossible and the circumstances were all wrong. Because love, real love, did not follow anyone's timeline but its own. And theirs had been worth waiting for. As Harper approached her 70th birthday, she often found herself reflecting on the path her life had taken. The ranch now covered over 1,000 acres, with their children and grandchildren helping to run the expanding operation. Grace had married a good man from Salida and lived with her family in a house they had built on the eastern edge of the property. Robert managed the cattle operations with his younger brother Riley, both men as strong and capable as their father had been at their age. Hope, the youngest and wildest of their children, had married a horse trader, and together they ran the breeding program that had become the ranch's pride. But despite all the growth and change, Harper's favorite place was still the porch of the original ranch house, sitting in the rocking chair Rutger had made for her 40th birthday. Rutger himself, now past 70, had slowed down considerably. His joints ached in cold weather, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had worked hard every day of his life. But his eyes were still that same striking blue-gray, and when he looked at Harper, she still felt the flutter in her heart that she had felt that first day in Pete's trading post, on a warm June evening in 1910, almost exactly 30 years after their wedding. The family gathered for Sunday dinner. It had become a tradition over the years, all of them coming together to share food and stories. The long table in the dining room, built by Rutger to accommodate their growing family, was crowded with children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren now. The noise was tremendous, everyone talking and laughing at once. Harper looked down the length of the table to where Rutger sat at the far end, and they shared a smile. All of this, had started with one desperate woman and one mountain man who had been brave enough to help her. After dinner, when the younger people had dispersed to various activities around the ranch, Harper and Rutger took their customary evening walk. They moved slowly now, Rutger leaning on a cane he had carved himself, but they still made the circuit of the property they had worked so hard to build. "Do you remember the night we drove off the squatters?" Harper asked as they passed the spot where the main campfire had been. "Like it was yesterday. I thought you were going to get us both killed with your insistence on helping, but I did not." "No, you did not. You were magnificent." He squeezed her hand. "You have been magnificent every day since." They continued walking, pointing out changes and improvements, reminiscing about challenges they had faced and overcome. When they reached the small cemetery where Harper's parents were buried, they stopped. Rutger had built a beautiful fence around the plot and maintained it carefully over the years. In addition to Harper's parents, 2 small graves held the babies they had lost, one born too early and one who had lived only a few days. The pain of those losses had faded with time but never disappeared completely. "We have been blessed," Harper said quietly. "So much more than we deserved. We worked for every bit of it," Rutger corrected gently. "But yes, we have been blessed too." As they turned to walk back toward the house, Harper stumbled slightly. Rutger caught her immediately, his reflexes still sharp despite his age. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern in his voice. "Just tired. It has been a long day." But Harper knew it was more than tiredness. She had been feeling increasingly worn down over the past months, as if her body was finally giving in to all the years of hard work. She had not mentioned it to Rutger, not wanting to worry him. That night, as they lay in bed together, Rutger held her close. "I know you have not been feeling well," he said quietly. "Do not try to hide it from me. I did not want you to worry. I am your husband. Worrying about you is part of the job." He kissed her forehead. "Promise me you will see the doctor next time we go to town." "I promise." The doctor's diagnosis when it came a week later was not good. Harper's heart was failing, worn out from decades of hard living. There was nothing to be done except rest and make her comfortable. Rutger took the news like a physical blow. "How long?" he asked the doctor, his voice hoarse. "Could be months, could be years. With someone as strong as your wife, it is hard to say." Harper made Rutger promise not to tell the children yet. She did not want them hovering over her, treating her like she was fragile. She wanted to enjoy the time she had left without everyone walking on eggshells. So they carried on, but with a new awareness of how precious each day was. Rutger began working less, spending more time with Harper. They took short walks, sat on the porch for hours talking, and made love with the tender desperation of people who knew time was running out. One evening in late summer, as they watched the sunset from their favorite spot on the ridge, Harper brought up something that had been on her mind. "When I am gone, I want you to promise me something," she said. Rutger's jaw tightened. "Do not talk like that. We have to talk about it sometime. Please, listen." He nodded stiffly. "I want you to stay on the ranch, help the children run it, be there for the grandchildren. Do not go back to the mountains and hide from the world again. I would not have a world without you in it." "Yes, you would. Our children need their father. Our grandchildren deserve to know you. Promise me you will not give up when I am gone." Rutger was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I promise, but only because you are asking." Harper made it through the fall and into the winter. By January, she was too weak to leave the house, but she still insisted on getting up each day and sitting in her rocking chair by the fire. The family knew now, of course. The children took turns staying with her, and the grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with life and noise. Grace moved back into her old room to help care for her mother, and Harper was grateful for her daughter's steady presence. On a cold February night, with snow falling gently outside the window, Harper woke to find Rutger sitting beside the bed, holding her hand. "I am here," he said quietly. "I am right here. I know." The voice was barely a whisper. "You have always been here when I needed you. That night you came to find me in Pete's trading post. I almost said no," Rutger confessed. "I almost told you to find someone else. Can you imagine? If I had missed out on this life because I was too stubborn and scared to take a chance, but you did not say no. You came, and you saved everything. You saved me first. Gave me a reason to come down from the mountain and live again." Harper smiled, though it took effort. "We saved each other then." "Yes, we did." Grace appeared in the doorway. "Papa, the others are here." Harper's children and many of her grandchildren filed quietly into the room, surrounding the bed. She looked at each beloved face, seeing Rutger in some, herself in others, and a beautiful blend in most. "I love you all so much," she said. "Take care of each other. Take care of this land. Make your grandfather and I proud." "We will, Mama," Robert said, his voice thick with tears. Harper felt her strength fading, but she was not afraid. She had lived a full, rich life. She had loved and been loved. She had built something lasting. She looked at Rutger one last time. "Thank you for the adventure." "Thank you for choosing me," he replied, tears streaming down his weathered face. Harper Preston Greyson closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the family she and Rutger had created together. Rutger honored his promise to her. He did not retreat to the mountains. Instead, he threw himself into helping their children run the ranch, passing on all the knowledge he had accumulated over decades of hard work. He was there when Robert's son broke his first horse. He taught Riley's daughters how to track and hunt. He bounced great-grandchildren on his knee and told them stories about their grandmother, making sure they knew how brave and strong and wonderful she had been. On quiet evenings, he would sit on the porch in the rocking chair he had made for Harper and talk to her as if she were still there. He told her about the children's accomplishments, about changes to the ranch, about how much he missed her. "I kept my promise," he would say. "I did not hide. But God, it is hard without you." Rutger lived another 5 years after Harper's death. He remained active and engaged with the family until the very end, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. They buried him next to Harper in the little cemetery, and the entire valley turned out for the funeral. The preacher spoke of a man who had lived with courage and honor, who had built a legacy that would last for generations. But Grace, speaking at the graveside, told a different story. She spoke of a father who had always made time for his children, who had been gentle despite his size and strength, who had loved their mother with a devotion that had inspired everyone who knew them. "My parents' love story began with my mother refusing to give up her father's land, and my father being brave enough to help her fight for it," Grace said. "It grew into something beautiful and lasting, something that created all of us. We are their legacy, and we will make sure their story is never forgotten." And it never was. The Preston Greyson Ranch continued to prosper through the changing decades of the 20th century. Each generation added their own contributions while maintaining the core values that Harper and Rutger had established. The original ranch house was preserved and eventually turned into a family museum of sorts, filled with artifacts from the early days. Harper's riding gear, the rifle she had used the night they drove off the squatters, the deed to the land that had started everything. Rutger's tools, the furniture he had built, the Henry rifle that had been his constant companion. And on the mantel in the main room, a photograph taken in 1905, showing Harper and Rutger standing in front of the ranch house surrounded by their children and grandchildren. They are holding hands, and anyone who looked closely could see the love and contentment in their faces. Visitors to the ranch often asked about that photograph, and whoever was giving the tour would tell them the story. About squatters who took over a woman's land while she was burying her father. About the mountain man who walked in alone and made them walk out fast. About a love that grew from desperate circumstances into something that would last beyond lifetimes. It was a story worth telling, a legacy worth preserving, because in the end, Harper and Rutger's greatest achievement was not the ranch they built or the cattle they raised or the land they acquired. It was the family they created, and the love they showed was possible even in the hardest of circumstances. They had started with nothing but courage and determination. They had faced down danger and uncertainty. They had worked harder than most people could imagine. And they had built a love story that would echo through generations, inspiring their descendants to be brave, to fight for what mattered, and to never give up on the people they loved. The mountains of Colorado still stood tall over the valley where the Preston Greyson Ranch sprawled across acres of prime land. The Arkansas River still ran cold and fast, providing water for cattle and horses. The seasons still turned, bringing snow and sun, challenge and opportunity. And somewhere in the wind that blew down from those mountains, the spirits of a fierce woman and the mountain man who loved her still watched over the land they had fought so hard to keep. Their story had ended, but their legacy continued, and that, after all, was the best happily ever after anyone could ask for.